Hello all, thanks for joining this webinar. We're going to wait about 2 or 3 minutes before we get started here, just so we can give everybody some time to sign on. Okay, hello all. We'll get started here with our webinar. This is the Pollinator Stewards, Pollinator Steward webinar series, number 8, See the Bees, Identifying and Monitoring Pollinators. So I'll start here with a few minutes of introduction, just pretty brief, and then we'll get into the presentation. This webinar series has been created by Pollinator Partnership Canada, Habitat Acquisition Trust, Saanich Native Plants, and Parks Canada. My name is Laura Mirandin, and I'm the Western Canada Program Director and Senior Pollinator Specialist with Pollinator Partnership Canada. And I'll have our other partners introduce themselves. Amy?
Yes, hi, I'm Amy Peltier and I work with Parks Canada as a Species at Risk Engagement Officer. I work between two Parks Canada locations, Fort Rod Hill and Fisgard Lighthouse National Historic Sites, where we've restored a 1-acre Garry Oak Learning Meadow, which we spoke about in an earlier webinar and which will also be featured today. And also in Gulf Islands National Park Reserve, where we work on both Garry Oak ecosystem restoration and coastal sand ecosystem restoration.
Thanks, Amy. Paige?
Hi, everyone. My name is Paige Erickson McGee, and I'm the Stewardship Coordinator for Habitat Acquisition Trust. And we work across Southern Vancouver Island, helping people understand and care for habitats in their backyard and in their neighborhood. And we have a pollinator outreach program with lots of different resources. And we partner with organizations like Pollinator Partnership Canada, Saanich Native Plants, and Parks Canada.
Wonderful. Thanks, Paige. Kristen?
Hi, everybody. My name's Kristen. I'm a biologist and co-founder of Saanich Native Plants. And I'm really passionate about conservation and ecology, ecosystem restoration, and especially native plants. And aside from the nursery, do teaching with a number of courses and workshops like this, and happy to be here. And thank you for being here.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Okay, so the series includes 10 webinars, and more information can be found on the Island Pollinator Initiative website. We've designed the webinar series so people can take them to become certified pollinator stewards. If you're interested, you can find out more information on the IPI website, and you can email me at lm@pollinator.org. I'll put that email up as well later. And by doing that, you can get on a list to receive more information about certification. All the webinars are recorded and posted for free and open access. So if you miss any or want to review sections, you can find them on the IPI site. So, you know, sometimes we might go through some of the resources and things pretty quickly, but they're all there on the website, the recordings that you can click on and go to the part that you want to check out again. And I'd like to thank our webinar sponsors that have made it possible to provide this series free of charge. In addition to the partners, Whole Foods, Van City, and the Growing Together Initiative have provided funds to support this series. And today we're talking about connecting with nature through observation and a deeper understanding of the beautiful diversity of pollinators that share our world, and which we are intricately tied to. So it's really important to be aware that both plants and animals are part of stewarded First Nations territories and are considered relatives to Coast Salish peoples of our area. The Greater Victoria area is home to 9 nations, which include the Esquimalt Nation, Songhees First Nation, Chiana First Nation, Suk First Nation, as well as 5 Saanich nations, including Pakwachin, Sayout, Sartlet, Sakum, and Malahat nations. And I encourage you, if you didn't see it live, to view the webinar that Bianca Elliott kindly did for this series, addressing the historical relationship that Saanich and Lekwungen peoples have to their respective territories since time immemorial, and how this relationship continues today. Some logistics for today's webinar. The presentation portion will run for about an hour, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for question and answer with the speakers and the partners. You can submit your questions throughout the presentation, so please do that using the question and answer function. So please get them in the Q&A function if you want them there for Amy and Paige, who will be our moderators today, to see them and to ask those questions during the question and answer period. And note that you can change how you view the webinar and the speaker layout through your webinar controls. And you can use the chat function to speak with us if you have any technical problems or side questions that you need answered during the presentation. And we'll be giving away a prize of these new Pollinator Partnership blank greeting cards at the end of the webinar. And this will be through a Moderator's Choice Award for however they pick it. Best, most interesting, thoughtful question chosen today by Amy and Paige, our moderators. So get those in the question and answer function. Okay, I'll introduce the 2 speakers for today's webinar. I'll be the first. Again, I'm Laura Morandin, and the Western Canada Program Director for P2C, Pollinator Partnership Canada, and a Senior Pollinator Specialist for both the US P2 and P2 Canada. I've been a bee and beneficial insect researcher for almost 25 years now. I have an MSc from Western, a PhD from Simon Fraser, and did postdoctoral work at UC Berkeley. I have a number of peer-reviewed publications, I've co-authored books, and have developed many technical and outreach guides on protecting pollinators. I work on national and international pollinator conservation and policy issues, and I've been with P2 for about 5 years now. My ultimate goal is to create more sustainable landscapes that integrate conservation with human use. And we're really honored to have Nathan Fisk with us here today speaking. Nathan has 8 years with Parks Canada, focusing on the restoration of vascular plant species at risk in both Garry Oak and coastal sand ecosystems of coastal BC. Over the last 2 years, he has been exploring the relationship of these species at risk and their associated pollinators, and through this has developed a deep appreciation for these majestic microfauna. I like those 2 words together. He hopes that the invertebrate observations discussed in this presentation will inspire others to participate in citizen science initiatives and restoration activities in their areas. This is the talk outline for today. I'll start with how to tell apart some of the main pollinating groups that are a bit tricky, the bees, flies, and wasps. Then I'll get into some of the amazing diversity of bees, characteristics of the different families, and one way to put these bees into groups for citizen science monitoring. I'll finish by touching on some citizen science monitoring and identification tools and programs, and I'll hand it over to Nathan, who'll talk about monitoring pollinators and what they're finding at Fort Rod Hill, a Parks Canada site on southern Vancouver Island. And if you want to hear more about that and the site at Fort Rod Hill, you can check out the recording for webinar 5, Creating Meadows for Pollinators, where Amy Peltier from Parks Canada went into detail about that project. Okay, so I'm going to start with a quiz. This might be really easy for some of you if you've got a background in pollinator ID or bee ID, but it might be a bit tricky for others. So in order to see pollinators in our world and start appreciating the value of habitat, it's really great to be able to tell the major groups apart from each other. And we'll start with telling apart the bees from the flies from the wasps. Okay, and so, some people think, well, that's pretty simple. Here's a bee, here's a fly, and here's a wasp. And so what we'll do here is I'm going to go through 10 slides, each with one picture of either a bee, a fly, or a wasp, and you need to choose which you think it is. So I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it, and then write down your answer if you like, or just keep track of your right and wrong on your fingers. And then I'll tell you the correct answer before we go to the next slide. So keep track of your score as we go. At the end of the quiz, we'll have a poll to see what the scores were. Okay, so let's move to our first picture here. And usually when I'm doing this for a live audience, I have to say, don't yell it out loud, let people guess on their own. And people always yell it out loud, but we don't have that problem here, which is maybe a little sad. Okay, first picture of 10. So in your head, or if you have a scrap piece of paper beside you, write down whether you think this is a bee, a fly, or a wasp. Okay, this is a fly. It's actually a ball fly in the Syrphidae, the syrphid or hoverfly family. And as you might guess, they're bumblebee mimics. And this probably helps protect them as they're out in the world foraging for nectar and pollen. Okay, number 2. On your paper or in your head, is this a bee, a fly, or a wasp? Okay, this one is a bee. It is a bumblebee. It's actually a male bumblebee. And males of bees don't sting. Only the females can sting. Number 3, bee, fly, or wasp. Okay, this one as well is a bee. This is a sweat bee from the family Halictidae, and we'll go over those families later. This is a small sweat bee, and these bees actually will lick your sweat. In the summertime, if you're sweaty, never been stung by one in the field. And they're not really even recognized as bees by most people. That's a finger that it's on. You can see how tiny they are. Next one, bee, fly, or wasp. Okay, this one is a bee as well. This is in the Meloponini. It's a type of social bee that are often referred to as the stingless bees. And they're found in most tropical and subtropical areas of the world. This is a picture I took in Guatemala, and these stingless bees are just all around and all over you and eating your honey or your syrup on your pancakes. And they're very cute. Next one, bee, fly, or wasp. Okay, this one is a fly. It's also a syrphid fly. These ones are actually great pollinators as well, and their larvae are also really good pest control, feeding on aphids. So these are great to see in your garden. Next one, bee, fly, or wasp. Okay, these are bees. These are orchid bees. And almost all of these bees are in South and Central America. These are really super interesting bees and unusual in the whole animal world, actually. The males pick up fragrances from orchids and then store and release those from their expanded back legs. And it's thought that this is to show females how fit they are, that they're able to do this and collect these compounds. So something like peacock feathers. Okay, next one, bee, fly, or wasp. Okay, this one is a fly. It's a robber fly. They're predators that mimic bees, and they'll lie in wait on plants and then grab other insects, insert their proboscis, and suck out the innards. I love it. Okay, and 3 left here, bee, fly, or wasp. Okay, this one is a bee. This is a pretty tricky one. This is a Hylaeus bee. I think, yellow-faced bee, sometimes people call them. We have a number of them in Canada and on Vancouver Island. And there's a number of species of these bees that are endangered on the Hawaiian Islands. And they carry pollen internally, so that's why they're not hairy and often get confused with wasps. Okay, next one, bee, fly, or wasp. This one is a bee. Again, another tricky one. I like to put these tricky ones in here so you get an idea of the amazing diversity of bees. But this is an Epiolus, a cuckoo bee, kleptoparasite. And so what they do is they don't collect their own pollen and nectar, but they actually lay their eggs in the nests of other bees. And there's about 100 known species of this genera of bees. Okay, and the last one, bee, fly, or wasp. Okay, and this is a wasp. So if I have shaken your confidence in what you know and you guessed a bee or something else just because of the pictures before, I'll let you know that this is actually a wasp, a yellow jacket. Okay, so I'm going to pull up a poll here so we can put in our answers, put in your true results, because that'll help us know where everybody's starting at. And it'll help you know how much maybe you've improved because of this webinar. So put in whether you got none, 1 to 3, 4 to 5, 6 to 7, 8 to 9, or all of them correct. Okay, we have about 86% of people that have voted. Almost 90% of people have voted. Give you another second to get your answer in if you want. Okay, so I'll end the polling and share the results with everybody here so you can see that. So there was nobody that got none of them correct. So everybody got at least one. That's awesome. The majority of people, this looks like a really normal spread here. We've got about most of the people, 33, 31% getting around 4 to 7 of them correct. So, that's really great if you're there already. You can skip the next part of the webinar and come back later, but that's really great scores. 8 to 9 correct, about 11% of people, and 4% actually got all of them. So yeah, you're great. So I will stop sharing these results. Okay, so many pollinators are easy to tell apart. Most of us can tell a bird from a lizard, from a mammal or a butterfly, but some, as we've seen, are really hard. And in particular, that's the bees, the flies, and the wasps. So I'm going to give you a cheat sheet on how to tell them apart. And actually, they're pretty easy, some of them anyways, once you know these things to look for. So let's start with how to tell bees from flies, because that is pretty easy when you have these tools and things to look for. Two of the first things to look for are the eyes and the antennae. So they're quite different in the bees and the flies. The antennae of flies, those flies that you might mix up with bees anyways, are short and stubby. The antennae of bees are medium long to long. The second thing to look for are the eyes. Flies have really big eyes that often meet or almost meet in the top of the head and in the front. The eyes are big and bulgy, whereas most bees have smaller kidney-shaped eyes on the side of their face. You can also sometimes tell by the wings if you're able to see that closely. Bees have 4 wings and flies have 2 wings that you can see easily anyways. Also the veins on the wings, so it depends how good your eyes are here. The veins on the wings of a bee make a cell pattern, whereas fly wings are more straight lines. You can't really use the hairiness, as some flies are really hairy, as you saw in the quiz. So really look for those eyes and the antenna. If you see something that looks exactly like a bee, but it has big bulgy eyes, short antenna, and 2 wings, it's a fly, not a bee, no matter how much it looks otherwise like a bee. Okay, so what about the second one? How do you tell a bee from a wasp? This can be more difficult because there's not those big tells, those major morphological differences. And that's because bees and wasps are much more closely related than bees and flies. Wasps have similar antennae and similar eyes to bees, and they have 4 wings. But if they do have all those characteristics and they're not hairy, then they're most likely a wasp. There are some bees that you saw are really hard to tell from wasps because they're not very hairy, but those are more the exceptions, and we won't worry too much about those in this webinar. Another thing that you might be able to see is an expanded back leg. So this is a characteristic of a bee, having this expanded section on their back leg, whereas wasps don't have that. They have much thinner legs. So that's another little trick. But to sum up telling bees from wasps, if it has the small eyes, long antenna, and 4 wings, you know, and it's roughly looking like a bee or a wasp, and it's hairy, it's a bee. If it has all of that but not hairy, it's likely a wasp. And so these non-hairy bees, you can start getting to know the ones in your area and knowing which ones are actually bees and not wasps. So that'll be a challenge for you. Okay, so now that you know those things, those ways to tell, let's do 2 more challenge pictures. We won't do a poll or anything, just in your head. Look at the image on the left and the right and choose between bee, fly, or wasp. I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, and if you chose fly for both, you're correct. Okay, now let's dive into some details about bees. In the Intro to Pollinators webinar in this series, I discussed a bit about what makes a bee so special as a pollinator and how and when they evolved. If you want to review that, you can find the recording on the IPI website. As a brief recap, bees are the most important pollinators in most ecosystems, and this is because they've evolved to feed almost exclusively on flowers for all of their life stages, collecting it and providing it to their young and using it as a food source as adults. There are 7 families of bees, and we mainly see 5 of those families here in Victoria and across Canada in general. There are some bees from that top group, the Melanophea, but they're pretty rare in Canada, and so we'll leave them out due to time constraints today. The 5 main families we see in BC and across Canada are the Apidae and the Megachile, which are the long-tongued bees, the Andrena, the Halictidae, and the Callididae, the short-tongued bees. And these 7 families together represent over 20,000 species of bees globally, with thousands of species of bees in most of the families. The species within a family are sometimes really different looking from each other, and sometimes so similar looking that only a few experts in the world can attempt to put them into species groupings. I've spent months of my life using a microscope to ID bees for my various research projects, and I can get, most to the genus level, some to the species level, but for the vast majority, pinned specimens need to go to experts for reliable ID to species. And Nathan will be talking about his experience using his experience IDing bees at Fort Rod Hill from photographs in iNaturalist. So I want to show you this, and I'll talk about some of the bees and some interesting things from each of the 5 main families. Not so you memorize any of it or even remember most of it, but so that it introduces you to this amazing world and hopefully inspires you to dive deeper into the world of bees. As this, really is a surface introduction to this fascinating world, but hopefully does inspire you to do more. So you can see some of the complexity here on this tree. Okay, so first up, the family Apidae. This family has 2 types of bees that are really familiar to most people, the honeybees and the bumblebees. This is the largest family of bees and also has some really wild and weird looking bees like the longhorn bees, the large and small carpenter bees, the orchid bees that I showed you, the stingless bees also showed you in that quiz, and nomad parasitic bees. Many of the bees in this family are known to be important crop pollinators as well. Okay, the next group is the Megachile, the 2nd largest family of bees, and this family has some bees you may be familiar with as well, the orchard mason bees and the leafcutter bees. They have their pollen carrying hairs on their bellies, which is different from the other groups. So that's something really to note about this group. The other groups mostly carry their pollen on their legs. Some people put out artificial nest homes for these bees, and we'll talk about good nest box design and maintenance in webinar 9, the next webinar in the series. The Andrenidae are short-tongued bees, as are the next 2 groups I'll cover. They're sometimes collectively referred to as the mining bees. Like most native bees in Canada, they're solitary and they dig burrows in the ground where they lay their eggs. Unlike other families, most of the Andrenidae, to me, look pretty similar to each other. They can emerge in large numbers from the soil in spring and early summer, and each species is out flying only for a few weeks. In most species of Andrena, their stinger is so reduced that even if they wanted to, they can't sting you. And, like other native bees, they're docile and non-aggressive to humans anyways. Okay, next one, the Halictidae are collectively known as the sweat bees. Most nest in the ground, and they range in size from tiny bees to medium-sized bees. So you can see a tiny one there. It's on my daughter's finger, actually, a little sweat bee, up to, fairly honeybee-sized bees. And they include some species that are shiny, some that are striped, some that are brilliant metallic green. And like I said before, they will actually lick your sweat in the summertime. They're pretty cute little bees. Okay, and then the final family is the Callididae, which are collectively known as the plasterer or polyester bees for the cellophane-like substance they line their egg chambers with. They have 2 main forms in Canada that you'll commonly see. The Hylaeus, which I showed in the quiz, which are the wasp-like ones with yellow markings often on their face. And then the more hairy version, or the more hairy ones in this group, the Callididae. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Just, sort of a quick romp through the bee families, and it inspires you to keep looking at them and trying to see new types. But if you want to start grouping bees as a citizen scientist, it can be pretty hard to ID many of them to the family level just by observing them out in the field, never mind to genus or species. But what you can do is you can group bees on a course level and use this knowledge to contribute to citizen science or just to enrich your outdoor experience. I'm going to show you a method we use when training citizen scientists to ID bees. First, you need to know what a bee is, and we covered that earlier in this webinar. Then you can split bees into groups. The 5 groups we often use for citizen science monitoring and just for general observation are first the honeybees, then the bumblebees, then the hairy-legged bees, which are sometimes known as the pollen pants or the pollen leg bees. All the same, just means they've got their hair on those back legs and they're using that to collect their pollen and packing it there. Then there's the hairy belly bees. So those are the Megachile bees, if you remember. And then there's all those other bees that don't fit into any of the other 4 categories. So we just group those together as other bees. And we start by pulling out honeybees from all the rest. And the reason that this is the first and most important distinction to make when IDing bees is that in Canada, honeybees are not native in North America. Instead, they're managed by people in hives. So when you see them, it's a sign that there's a managed colony somewhere within a few miles of you, not a sign of a wild population or that you've increased populations of native bees or anything. So it's important to pull those out. I talk about the difference between managed and native bees in the first webinar in this series and how both are important, but that honeybees are not an ecological conservation concern, whereas wild bees are. Honeybees can be distinguished from other bees in a few ways. The main thing you'll start to notice about honeybees is that they're medium-sized. Most of their hair is on their thorax, that's that upper chest area, and they have large, shiny, flat back legs. They may or may not have pollen balls on them. Honeybees and bumblebees are only bees that carry wet pollen. So it's like this ball on their back legs, and it looks quite different than the other bees that carry dry pollen. So you'll sometimes see those wet-looking pollen balls on their back legs. You can't really use color that much with honeybees. They can really range from a very dark, almost black color to a very golden color. But once you spend some time out in the field looking at bees, you'll really start getting an eye for the honeybees and which ones they are compared to the other bees. And there's a bunch of methods for slowing down bees if you want to take a quicker, if you want to have a better look at them. Some people have suggested getting a spray bottle of water and spraying them a little bit, and that slows them down for a few minutes, I guess, until they dry out. You can get a Tupperware container and put them in the fridge for a few minutes to slow them down so you can look at them. You can go out in the morning when it's a little chilly and they're slower. But in general, you can get pretty close to them in the field. They're not going to be aggressive. And so, I just encourage you to spend some time looking and trying to partition and group things, and you'll be surprised how quickly you get better at it. Okay, so I show this picture so you can take a minute or a few seconds anyways to look at it and see if you can find the honeybee in this picture. Okay, so the honeybee is here. If you can see my cursor, we're around the center, a little bit below midline of the picture. And one thing I like people to note here is the huge back legs that trails under it. You'll really notice that in the field. That's different from the other bees in our area. The rest of the bees you'll see around here are mostly native bees, not all, but mostly. And I'll show you how to categorize them. The bumblebees are probably the easiest native bees to ID to group. They're big and robust and hairy, but there is a lot of variation in their size. So, while they're big, there can be quite small bumblebees as well, especially that first brood that comes out in the spring. They also have those big back legs and carry pollen on the back legs in wet lumps like honeybees, but they're pretty easy to tell apart from honeybees. We have about 40 species of bumblebees in Canada, about 7 species that we commonly see here in the greater Victoria area. And while it's pretty easy to tell a bumblebee from other bees, it's not so easy to tell bumblebees apart from each other and to get them to species, unless you're in an area and you know what species are there. That makes it much easier. Yeah, they can be tricky for a number of reasons, even though they, on the surface, they seem like they should be pretty easy to ID to species. So yeah, get to know the ones in your area. You can use iNaturalist to help with that, or I'll show you some resources as well. So there's a great guide that I use quite extensively, The Bumblebees of North America. A few authors on there, including Sheila Kola from Canada, which is great. And this guide it can be quite technical to ID them to species, but you know, it's a great resource. There's good pictures and the color variations of the different bumblebees. So if you do want to dive deeper into bumblebees, I encourage you to get that. I think it's on Amazon. Also on our Pollinator Partnership website in the US, we have guides to the eastern bumblebees, the western bumblebees. There's a lot of overlap between the US and Canada, so these will apply to Canada as well. Okay, so the next two groups we divide by where they carry their pollen. So the first are the ones that carry it on their legs. So they're the hairy-legged bees or the pollen pants bees. These are all the bees that carry the pollen on their legs except the honeybees and bumblebees. Okay, so we've taken those out into their own categories. And these bees can be ID'd by the copious amounts of hair and sometimes pollen, if they're pollen foraging, that you see on their legs, mostly on the back legs. And then there's the hairy belly or pollen belly bees. And this will be bees in the Megachile family, including the orchard mason bees and the leafcutter bees. They, of course, have the pollen-carrying hairs on their bellies and carry their pollen there, not on their legs. And finally, the last group, these are the problem children. They're generally the bees that either parasitize other bees, so they don't need to carry pollen and nectar, or they're the bees that carry pollen and nectar internally, so they don't have very hairy bodies. These bees often resemble wasps and can be pretty difficult at first. So we lump these all into one group for citizen science purposes. Okay, so getting back to the diagram, with practice, you should be able to start putting bees into one of these 5 categories. Don't get discouraged if at first you're finding it hard. It's like anything, it takes a while to get an eye and a knack for it. But once you start looking, you will really pick it up quickly. And once you get a hang of the bees and pollinator groups, you can participate in citizen science. The Insight Citizen Science app uses similar categories to the ones I just went over. It was developed by Dr. Cameron Cartier and Jeffrey Campbell from Emily Carr University of Art and Design with Dr. Elizabeth Ellie from Simon Fraser University. We at Pollinator Partnership came on later as consultants and partners, and we now manage and host the app. So this app is great for making measures of bee diversity at a coarse scale and abundances and comparing plant species or habitats in their value for pollinators. This is quite different from other apps such as iNaturalist that are great for IDing and knowing absence of species. For the Insight app, you monitor pollinators in a meter-squared area and use categories to help measure that abundance and diversity on a coarse level and you can compare this between different plants and different habitats. So it can be really useful if you're trying to see either what's the difference between this plant and their value for pollinators, or this group of plants or this type of habitat. It can be used in app form if you have an iPhone, or just by paper, printable observation sheets. Great to use with kids or if you want to be offline. So you can check out the Insight Citizen Science webpage if you're interested in learning more about measuring diversity and abundance in a citizen science way. There are, of course, many other ways to get involved in pollinator counts or identification. I went over the Insight app and paper method. They're pretty unique in quantifying abundance and diversity at a coarse scale, letting you compare habitats. Nathan will talk about iNaturalist, which is an incredible ID tool for plants and pollinators, as much as can be ID'd by photo. There's Bumblebee Watch, which involves loading pictures of bumbles to a website where you can use a key and then get expert help on ID. And there's many monarch and butterfly counts that take place in communities across Canada. So I'd encourage you to check out things in your own region that you can get involved in for citizen science. So I'm now going to turn it over to Nathan. And at the end of his talk, we'll show you some more resources for BID.
Thanks, Laura. Let me just take over the screens here. Hi, everybody. Thanks for attending today. Just like to tell you a little bit about the work I've been doing for the past few years, trying to better understand our pollinator communities at Fort Rod Hill. Set the stage a little bit. Down here on the southern tip of Vancouver Island, you can see the marker there for Fort Rod Hill and Fiskard Lighthouse National Historic Sites. Zooming in a little bit more, in the circle there, you can see the lighthouse out on its own, and then sort of the fields behind it is where Fort Rod Hill is. You can see it's connected to, well, for this area, a rather large green belt, something that's not too common anymore on the South Island. Zooming in a little bit more, you can see the lighthouse in the bottom right there, and then if you look in the upper part of the frame, that red boundary is the learning meadow we've been talking about. Another zoom in there, you can kind of get a bit better idea, a bit of a mixed canopy there, open meadow, kind of deeper woodlands. But total area of where we've taken all our observations is just about under an acre in size. And then the final zoom in kind of puts it in place for what the area looked like this spring. If you notice in the back of the photo here, you can sort of see a white sign. And I wanted to sort of counterpoint this image with an image of where we started from. You can see that sort of same sign back here. So if you want to learn more about how we built this place up, check out Amy's webinar earlier in the series. But at this point, there wasn't too much pollinator activity happening at the site. You know, with very low species diversity throughout the year, and that was one of the big targets, was to increase the abundance and diversity through the seasons. So once we did sort of have a fuller community, we needed a way to kind of classify what was happening and be able to share that data sort of freely. One of the things for me is I needed a place to learn from. And I found iNaturalist was very good for me as a visual learner. The presentation style of the app is, I kind of think of it as flashcards. You're seeing timely examples of what species are occurring when. One of the other features of the app, it lets us cross-reference our pollinator observations with the plant they're interacting on. So when we export our data, we can start to get an idea of the sort of interactions. One thing that Laura did mention is that unless we photograph species repeatedly or make note of it in the observation fields, this platform doesn't really track abundance as much as things like Insight or sort of paper forms would, but it at least does give us some hint as the pollinator community that's present at the site. And if you'd like to follow along with anything we're doing, you can find us at Growing Together on iNaturalist. So you might remember this slide from just a few minutes ago. Primarily what I'll be talking about is groups 2, 3, and 4. They're the chief pollinators we see. Group 1, the honeybees, we've seen a few examples of those, typically in the lean times of the year, maybe when there's not too many other flowers around. We'll catch the odd honeybee, but normally we don't see them too often at our site. So starting with a poll here, Laura, if you'd be able to put that up for us. Yeah, there we go. So we're wondering, in the Pacific Marine Ecozone, which is, well, my cursor will be covered by the pole a little bit, but just the marine edge of BC there, how many different species of bumble, sweat, leafcutter, and mining bees would you expect there to be? I'll just give a minute for the poll results to come in.
Yeah, we're up at about 83% of people have put in a vote. I'll just give it another second here.
Nice, 50% of the people, 100 to 250. That's great. So from those 4 categories, there's about 170. You know, it's a really large area. There'll be much less, you know, in any given region of that, but there's about 170 throughout this. There we go. Throughout this whole sort of area, right around there. If you're interested in specific breakdowns of bees and the region they're in for British Columbia, there was an excellent paper put out by Corey Sheffield and Jennifer Herron that details the species and their distribution throughout the province. Really helpful in identifying species. There are a few genera that you can scope out by range, and you can find out which bee you have. So moving into category 2 there, the bumblebees. We've been able to ID seven species to species. The most common we tend to see is the yellow-faced bumblebee. Emerges very early in the year and persists quite long through the season. We see it up until most of the blooms are done. One of the other bees we'll find quite early is the black-tailed bumblebee, or melanophea. Also very early, almost February and March, we'll see the earliest ones emerge on a warm day. And then things down to the Sitka bumblebee, we see it a little bit less common, but it's a little bit smaller of a bumblebee. I'd seen in the questions that some people were asking what a corbicula is. You can sort of see it on a few of these examples right here. Another common name would be the pollen basket. It's where the bees store pollen for transport. One I'd like to feature is the western bumblebee, Bombus occidentalis, recently listed through COSEWIC as threatened. And we first spotted it in the Learning Meadow in 2019, probably because that's when we first started really looking for it. But it was pretty exciting for us in a restored area to see, you know, threatened bees starting to make use of it. So in 2019, we first saw it in the fall, and I would imagine it would be a new queen that we saw, you know, finding a new territory, because this year we've seen it all through the year, right from April through to July. And it's interesting on this one, the way I was able to make the April spotting was by sound. The flower that it's on in the bottom left there, the shooting star, is pollinated by buzz pollination. So the bees vibrate their wings at a different frequency, and it releases the pollen. And it's one of the things in spotting these invertebrates is that you can hear some by sound as well. You know, the bumblebees will have a much deeper pitch than say some of the smaller bees, or you can hear them doing buzz pollination, say on the shooting star or on thimbleberry or things like that. You know, obviously looking for a large insect on a bloom is you know, probably the easiest place to start. But then you'll start to see more behavioral traits. You know, males will often be perched looking for mates. Moving on to the sweat bees. We've been able to get 3 of these to species level. And they're pretty challenging given the size. You know, they're maybe a centimeter long. So for photo observations, I think getting observations to genus is still very helpful for us. It lets us know kind of the management types we need to do. You know, things on the landscape we need to maintain to provide homes for these bees over the winter. You know, the floral resources that are really important in supporting different kinds of bees as well. Just a few to highlight there, because we work with species at risk in our nursery, and it was sort of the major focus for digging deeper into the pollinator interactions. Just wanted to highlight the sweat bees on golden paintbrush here. But you can sort of see how just how small some of these are, and how tricky it can be to get a clear enough photo that would allow you to ID things. I got lucky with the photo on the left, in that my focus was right on the bee's head. But you can see on the right there the sort of metallic sweat bees, much smaller, and I think I'll need to start using our macro lens if we want to get better IDs on those. But saying that, you can also use cell phones are pretty good. Taking videos with cell phones, you're able to pull out still images and use those. So you don't necessarily need an SLR. Point and shoot cameras, I find, are a little bit trickier because of the lag between when you push the shutter and when the photo is actually taken. So videos can be helpful that way, in that you can pull a in focus still out and use that as your observation. Moving on to the pollen pants, the hairy leg bees, the Andrena. We've only managed to get 1 species, we think, to species level. But there's about 54 Andrena in our area, and you know, being a centimeter or 2 long, it's another one that's tricky to push to species level just through photographic observation. But it is important for us to know, and that they're sort of a chief pollinator of early species that emerge. They're able to tolerate cooler temperatures, along with some of the bumblebees. Typically, some of the flies are the first invertebrates we see, and the bumblebees aren't far behind that. Put this one up here because I love the mandibles on this Andrena. We don't know the species of it yet, but fingers crossed. And I guess it's what I'd like to use this slide for is talking about the views that have helped us ID these invertebrates. You know, finding unique characteristics is often very helpful, and will get you that sort of extra step towards identification. You know, views of the face and of the body, particularly for bumblebees, the markings on the abdomen are important. But as well as seeing the face. Here we are on the Megachile. Happy to report we've been able, through the paper, the Sheffield and Heron paper, the Dianthidium there, we've potentially scoped down to the species just by range. So we've managed to ID 9 species of leafcutter. Typically a bit larger, except for the orchard bee, a bit larger, a bit more tolerant of photographic approach, very good at posing. They emerge a bit later in the season. Again, not the orchard bee, which is very early, but we'll see them kind of mid to late season when the leaves are in full flush and they have plenty to make their nest cells out of. You know, down the bottom left there, we've got a cuckoo bee and a carter bee, both in the leafcutter family, but just a little bit different in terms of their life history. The cuckoo bee, Laura talked about a little bit, but doesn't collect pollen on its own, but is more of a kleptoparasite, and there's multiple avenues for that. And the wool carter bee is an introduced species that we tend to find shaving the hairs off of species to line their nest with. Things like self-heal. We find it quite often on that, trimming the fuzz off of it. One of the species of interest this year, we were able to find this Megachile melanophea, spending a good deal of time pollinating our Hosacea gracilis. Like I mentioned before, the pollinator interactions are sort of a big unknown for a lot of these species. You know, it can be listed that Bombus and leafcutter bees are the chief pollinators, but as opposed to which ones, there's still a big question mark. You know, our sampling structure isn't rigorous by too many means, but at least it's a presence absence, and we can start to at least build some idea of what's making use of these species and helping them persist in Canada. And then everything else. We had quite a lot of cellophane bees this year. They were swarming around our ocean spray. Pretty tricky to get them to sit still. I don't know how many hundreds of photos I took to try to get one sitting still, but I managed to get one at least. We also found our first sighting of a cellophane cuckoo bee. Again, one that doesn't spend, sort of an incidental pollinator. Spends most of its time trying to find cellophane bee nests and put its young inside. I also see we have some common digger bees. We see those sort of early in the season. It's on sea blush there. Also very tricky to get photos of standing still. They tend to not stop for very long. They're always on the move. Nomata, another parasite that there really hasn't been too much documentation to get the nomad bees down to species, but they'll all sort of exhibit that reddish coloration, and we see them sort of in the main season when there's lots of food for them. And then on the right are the longhorn bees, easily broken off in groups by their nice long horns. And one of the other notes is the Melissoides down there on the yarrow. We think we've got that one to species as well, again through the Sheffield and Heron paper, just scoping by region, and it's definitely a useful piece of information. And happy hunting, everyone. This one of the first bees we see. I mentioned the black-tailed bumblebee. That's it there. Always important to try to get as many different angles as you can to help people push your ideas as far as we can with photography.
Okay, thanks a lot, Nathan. That's awesome to see what you're doing and how in detail you're going at. That's just incredible, and I'm sure inspiring to a lot of people that are watching this. So I put up this slide here. It's some examples of resources if you want to dive deeper into bees. I've roughly, tried to organize them a little bit by the sort of less technical ones up top, pretty easy entry, to the more technical ones towards the bottom where you're going to need to pin specimens and have a microscope. So I think there's probably a pretty varied group on this webinar. So I tried to include something for everyone there. You can Google any one of these to find them if you can't get the website just right now. The Island Pollinator Initiative, we have this really pretty easy entry, double-sided field pocket guide that you can print off and take out, and it has the different families of bees there. It is for Southern Vancouver Island, but a lot of it really applies across Canada, so you can check that out. There's Bees of Your Backyard. This is a really excellent book and just an amazing poster that they have, so check that out. There's Victory Gardens for Bees, which goes into, it's by Lori Wiedenheimer from Vancouver. An excellent book and so well presented, and has a lot of information about different bee groups. Again, on Pollinator Partnership, you can find those Bumble Bee ID guides, and of course there's the Bumble Bees of North America. That's a really great guide if you want to dive into bumblebees. There's the Bees of the Willamette Valley, and that's an online PDF, so just do a Google search for that. It was a really long, ugly link, so I didn't put it up here, so that's that one here. And if you're researching these and want to get more into it, you probably already know about Discover Life and about the bee genera of North and Central America, which are really great guides if you want to dive into this very deeply. Okay, and then finally, there are two new online resources. And so Nathan mentioned Corey and Jenny quite a bit, and what Corey, and probably with Jenny's help as well, has put together is an online resource called the Bees of Canada. It's through the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, and here's the website for that, and that has a filterable list of bees that you can look up, and it also has filterable plant lists, so you can look for your area, your region, and see what bees are there. Or you can go to the paper as well that Nathan mentioned. I think it's probably all been uploaded here now by Corey. Another really new tool that's just come online in the last week or so is this Shiny app done by Melissa Guzman and some collaborators of hers at Simon Fraser University, Pollinator Partnership, the Native Bee Group of BC. And the Shiny app is really cool because what you can do with that is you can search out a certain plant and then see what bees have been found on it by researchers. So this is research grade information in here. So we're starting to get those associations in different regions between different plants and the bees right to species. So really valuable resources there. Okay, so I'll remind everyone that we have 2 webinars left in the series. The registration is open for urban habitats for pollinators, which will include a section on bee home design and maintenance. And we'll post the date for the last webinar shortly. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to our moderators, Paige and Amy, for the question period. And thanks everyone for your attendance here.
Hello,
Great,
everyone.
thanks so much, guys. Thank you for those wonderful and informative presentations. And just a reminder to folks, if you do have questions, you can put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. Yeah, we'll pose them sequentially here. So maybe Paige and I can take turns. First question was from Eloise, and she's wondering what kind of plants are preferred by wool carder bees?
Yeah, so I think a few of us could probably answer this. So it kind of depends if you're meaning the nectaring and pollen foraging that they're doing or what they're using to line their nests, which could be quite different. So they're looking for those sort of hairy leaves where they want to collect those fibers for those little hairs for their nest. But I've seen them foraging on quite a bit in my garden. They seem to like the gumweed. They seem to like the goldenrod, like all the other pollinators do. So yeah, I see them on quite a few different plants for nectar and pollen. And then yeah, in terms of collecting, I think Nathan and Kristen might have some ideas there too.
Yeah, like I said, the biggest one I've seen them on at our site is the self-heal. Just sort of seems to line up with their emergence period and what's blooming at our site.
Awesome. So,
oh, and actually, sorry, I'll add here because I haven't used this app this much because it just came out, but that shiny app by Dr. Melissa Guzman, you can put in Will Carter Bee and see all the plants that it's been found on in research in our area. So yeah, just an amazing app and I'm looking forward to getting into it.
that's so cool. That sounds like a really amazing app. I'll definitely have to check it out. Okay, so the next question is by Jan, and I think it's for Laura. It asks, are there any plans to have the Insight app developed for Android?
Yes, is the short answer. We are a nonprofit charity, you know, like many of you, I'm sure, involved in this world too, always looking for funding. So it is one of our major things that we are looking for a sponsor or funder to get the Android version. I can't use the app because I have an Android, so I'm very interested in getting that as well. There's also a few updates we want to do on it. We want to make it a little bit more applicable Canada-wide. There's a few category changes. So we have some work to do on it now that we have taken over running it. But yeah, like everything, we need to find the funding for it.
Okay. Sharon mentioned that she saw a robber fly, which she thinks is Laphria ventralis. It was quite a large fly about 2 weeks ago at Miracle Beach, and she's curious to know if anyone knows what they feed on.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take that again. So, you know, I'm not a fly expert by any means, but just my little bit of reading. They are predators. So robber flies are predating other insects. If we're talking about the same thing, it's a little hard with common names. And you said the genus and species, but I'm not familiar with that. So I think, you know, if you think you know what it was by genus and species, I would look it up and see. But robber flies that I know, yeah, they're predators, and they're not hiding out, they're sitting there in plain sight, but in disguise on flowers looking for insects. Nature's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I discovered in my very quick Google search is that they feed on bees, beetles, dragonflies, other flies, grasshoppers, leafhoppers, wasps, and other insects. So it sounds like they're generalists.
Very cool. Oh, great. So the next question is, what do bumblebees use pollen for?
Yeah, so bumblebees use pollen for their protein source. So they need protein for not for themselves as adults so much, but they need it for their young to develop on. So bumblebees, and actually all our native bees, that's what they're using. They're using pollen for their young to develop. And if you go back to some of our other webinars, we talked about how the different bees collect pollen and nectar. They'll make a lump of it usually, put it in their nest. If they're a bumblebee, it's going to be in their larger social nest. If they're a solitary bee, it'll be in a single cell. And then they lay their egg on that pollen and nectar ball. The young will then hatch out of the egg, turn into a larva, and they'll feed on the pollen and nectar, getting that protein and carbohydrates that they need from that mix of pollen and nectar. Then they'll pupate into adults, in which stage, you know, they only live for a few weeks usually for most of the species, and they really don't need much pollen at that stage, but they're going to collect it for their next generation. And just to touch on the pollen thing, it is a really interesting situation with the bees, because that's what makes a bee is that from wasps they develop. So there was some ancient wasp, and there's lots of wasps that do this still, and did that back then, 120 to 40 million years ago. They're collecting dead insects or other protein sources from actual animals for their young, and bringing it back to their nests, or laying their eggs right on the protein source. So when bees became bees, they started getting their protein source from plants. They became the vegetarians, and they got their protein source from flowers, and started bringing that back to their nests for their young. So yeah, the pollen and protein is a really interesting part of the evolution and their life cycles.
Okay, so somebody asked if it would be possible to distribute the reference papers by email to the participants. And I just know that Nathan mentioned the paper by Corey Sheffield and Jenny Herron, and that it would be possible to find that one by looking up that Bees of Canada website. But yes, if people are particularly interested, I'm not sure which other papers are mentioned, but we could look at doing that. And then you can also look at the recording of the webinar and go to that, that frame where we have that list of resources on there too.
Great. So the next question on the list is, how do you best attract mining bees or miner bees?
I think offering a diverse plant community is sort of the best way. It won't just attract mining bees, but having a diverse early season selection, you know, species dependent, but typically they are a little early. You know, it's having dead plant stocks for them to mine into is obviously important. The flight range for a lot of these pollinators isn't extremely large, so a lot of the resources they need will have to be close by. We definitely see them perching on a red flowering currant early in the season and patrolling around those. But again, there's 54 species, so having diverse floral resources early in the season would be your best bet.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. And I'll just quickly add to that as well, that a lot of the miner bees like some really packed soil. And so kind of scrubby areas, not having everything mulched. So they have some ground nesting areas. We see them a lot in places even like schoolyards where the soil is really packed and the grass is a bit sparse, because then there's spots for them to nest. So I don't know, get a troop of kids to run over your lawn, maybe lots. I do notice them on our lawns around my area in Esquimalt. If the lawns aren't really manicured and really well kept up, they're a little bit sparse. You can see dirt in between, and I see a lot of miner bees coming out in between the blades of grass, just right beside the sidewalk. When I was working in agricultural areas, I would see mining bees come out of the edge ditch areas and even right on the paths where the farm equipment would be going. So they're not too picky, but they do want some bare soil.
Okay, and Jan asked, thinking about public education, which of the resources that you listed would allow reproduction and posting by nonprofits?
Yeah, so the books you would need to purchase. So the Victory Gardens, the Bees in Your Backyard, those are books that you could purchase. In terms of the resources on the IPI website, that double-sider, that's free. Anybody can print that and use that. That's what it's there for. Anything on the Pollinator Partnership website is for that, for outreach. Some of them have a bit of a cost in terms of shipping and things if it's a book, but most of the resources are free for everybody. The IPI website has a lot of resources there. All of them are free, I think, that you can download and use them as much as you can, because that's what they are there for. There's no sort of copyright that you can't reproduce them. Anybody else? Paige, you have a lot of resources too on HAT.
Yeah, so the HAT website, hat.bc.ca, we have some, not so much on ID, but just sort of general pollinator introduction resources that can easily be shared and posted to other websites and all kinds of things. And there are lots of resources out there. You can always send an email to the organization if you're concerned about reproduction, but lots of stuff already has the logo on it. So we're happy that people are sending it out and getting it out to the community. Okay, so any other resources people can think of, or I'll move on to the next question? Okay, so the next one is from Anne, and Anne asks, is it only honeybees that carry wet pollen, or do bumblebees do that as well? I'm not sure if I know. Laura?
Yeah, it's the honeybees and the bumblebees that carry the wet pollen in the corbicula, which Nathan kindly explained for me because I was probably getting too jargony. Yeah, in their pollen baskets on their back legs. So the ones that they're those social bees in the Apidae family. So those stingless bees in the central and tropical, subtropical regions of the world, they also carry those wet pollen lumps back to their nests. Kind of interesting. I don't know what the reason is behind that. I'm sure I could guess something, but I don't know why. But it is really different looking. So if you look at this picture that's on your screen now, that's the dry pollen on the legs. And it's quite different from the lumps of wet pollen that you'll see on the bumbles and the honeys.
So Wendy asked, do you have any tips for photographing bees?
Keep shooting. Digital cameras are very good. I can't imagine the number of rolls of film I would have gone through using a film camera. But like I mentioned before, trying to get different angles, and I've found the more I post and see why this photo wasn't able to get up to species or genus. Well, you need a view of this side of the abdomen, or you need the shot of the face on this one. So really trying to get all the angles if you can, yeah, sharp focus on the eyes. But again, video stills are very good. Yeah, keep trying.
There was also a webinar that was done not too long ago by the Native Bee Society of BC on just that, on tips for photographing bees, and it might still be available on their website, so you could always Google Native Bee Society of BC and see if they have that recording there. It was really useful.
Nice. That's great. Okay, so the next one is from Shauna, and Shauna asks, I often upload my bee pictures to iNaturalist, but it doesn't really give isolated species beyond saying bees. Is that helpful? is that still helpful to researchers, or would I be better off waiting and chasing to get even better photos?
I'd say, everything is helpful. Don't be shunned away because you feel your photo quality is too low. I would assume maybe Sean is talking about the algorithm being able to identify things. Typically, when you first put it out, iNaturalist will suggest species or genus or just bees for you, and that's helpful as well. When anybody else looking through them might be able to bump it up just through visuals, but I mean, the better quality you can get, you might get a little bit farther, but everything helps.
Laura, did you have anything to add, or is that?
Yeah, no, I think Nathan answered that really well. Put up what you can, and we don't know if maybe at some point it will get ID'd. There's new tools for ID by wing venation coming online, machine learning and things. So, put up what you have. There's, I think, infinite space in cloud digital. I don't know if we're going to overload it, but I say go for it. And, try to get better pictures and learn, like Nathan said, learn like what characteristics you need to try to get pictures of to get it to, the genus level or whatever. Do you need a picture of the wing venation? Do you need to see that back leg or the side of the face or the front of the face? But you'll start getting a feel for that the more you do it.
And I just wanted to say thanks to folks who are adding resources in the chat function if people want to take a look there. Wendy posted the link to that Sheffield and Heron paper, and someone else posted that they've been gathering resources and shared that website. So thanks to folks for sharing with the community. So a question from Eloise. My neighbor uses pesticides. Oh, just lost the question. My neighbor uses pesticides. Do you have any ideas of how I can tactfully give them info on the effects that this has on pollinators?
Well, I think some, you could have a signage on your yard or garden that says pollinator habitat, and, tactfully point it in the direction of their driveway, and see if they ask. It might be a bit challenging for that, but you could also look at the bylaws in your community and get a sense of, what your municipality or city prefers their participants to do. But there are some resources out there I've seen before. Laura, did you have specific resources about that topic?
So the Invasive Species Council of BC, I worked on a document with them on pesticides, a general pesticide document, just like that, sort of an outreach one, knowing what they could be doing to bees and limiting them. So I don't know, it depends, I guess, on your relationship with your neighbor, if you can hand them something like that. But you can check the Invasive Species Council to see if that brochure, or maybe it's just a one-page info sheet, has come out. Again, depending on your relationship with them, you could even, see what they're using. Is it insecticides or is it herbicides? Herbicides, probably not as much direct effect on bees. There is some information that they might cause some sublethal effects on bees, but in general, probably not a big problem for bees. Whereas the insecticides, a lot of the insecticides are a problem. So, kind of depends what they're using. Is it drifting onto your land? Are they using it when there is low drift? I think for me, I would be pretty upset if they were using it in a windy time and it was coming onto my land, and I probably wouldn't have too much problem saying something at that point. But yeah, it depends on sort of your personality and your relationship, I think.
Nice. I'm just gonna put in the chat the link to the Invasive Species Council resource. Okay, so the next question is, we're going to wrap up questions pretty quick here, but the next question is, understand some native bees are troubled by mites. Can gardeners do anything to help?
Nathan, did you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. You know, in all the photos I've taken, I've only seen one or two native bees with mites on them. They occur. They occur in nature. They're part of the web, and the nature of the bees we have in this area, they tend to be solitary nesters. Or what I understand is that dense aggregations of bees tend to be more of a draw to parasites. You know, if you have bee houses, it's important to clean them out every season to reduce the mite load. But they do occur, and they're part of the system. So seeing a few on the odd bee isn't anything to be concerned about. But if you notice bees in your yard are being overwhelmed by mites, that might be a signal that you need to clean out any residences or anything like that.
Yeah, and then just to add on to that, there is a fairly good body of research showing that bees that have good nutrition, so a diversity of pollen and nectar sources, are less susceptible to parasites like the mites, but also disease. So one of the big problems with mites for honeybees, so they are a huge problem with managed honeybees, is that these mites transfer diseases. And some of these diseases can be transferred at the focal point of the flower where all these bees are going. It's like a classroom of kids all sharing their viruses. So yeah, having diverse nectar and pollen sources is really what we need to make them less susceptible to, like Nathan says, it's a natural part of the ecosystems and environment. But in the past, they would have had more tools to fight them off if they had the proper nutrition.
Okay. Just a couple remaining questions here. I'm going to combine these two. For ground nesting bees like bumblebees, what can we do to create so not damage potential nesting sites? And do bumblebee nest boxes work?
So the first part in terms of not damaging nests. So bumblebees will nest, some species are kind of generalists. They'll nest in the ground, at the surface, or above ground. Other species of bumblebee prefer above ground. Others are, really particular. They'll only nest underground. So they do all, though, tend to nest in hollows created by other organisms or dead and decaying material. So, being a little more messy in your yard and leaving maybe some piles of compost. And if a bumblebee nests in there in the spring, just back off of it for that summer. They're just annual colonies, so it'll only be there for 1 year. I don't know if you want to bring mice into your yard or anything, probably not, but they like old mouse burrows. We've had a few nesting in our yard here and there over the years. They never seem to nest in the same place twice. That's probably so they don't get parasite buildup. But we'll just put a little flagging tape or something there just so people know not to step right on the hole. And we've never been stung by the bees that are nesting in our yard. You can go right up to the nest, look down into the hole, just don't get your face too close. And yeah, it's not a problem. Just have something there so you don't, step right on them to injure them or make them angry with you, which is, I guess, the only time they probably sting. So I think that's the first part. I'll briefly answer the second, and then I'll hand it over to Nathan because he probably has some good additions. The second part, in terms of do nest boxes work? So I used to do research on mice, and so we had nest boxes for mice, which were, I don't know if people have me on screen here, they're about maybe a foot by 3/4 of a foot, and as a box, and we would put old cotton batting in there to catch mice and then do experiments and things on them in the wild, energy use and things like that. We weren't hurting them. But we'd always get bumblebees nesting in those boxes. So we'd go in there with our hands at night trying to find mice, and you know, it's a big surprise when you find a bumblebee nest. Not the best surprise at night. So yeah, they would use those a lot. People have tried to, you know, sort of replicate bumblebee nests, and I think there's varying success from what I understand from most kind of researchers or other conservation organizations and, you know, just enthusiasts that do this. There's not a lot of luck with bumblebee nest boxes. Doesn't hurt to try. We put a few out around our yard, put in some of our guinea pig bedding in there to make it smell like a rodent. So there's some tricks like that that you can try, having a tube going to your box. But lots of resources online if you want to check out different ways and tricks for making bumblebee boxes. Bob Maxwell from the Peninsula Area and Egg Commission, he's retired now, but he said they were always in something on his water. Like, he tried to put out boxes for them all the time. They would never nest in those, and they nested in some of his water irrigation system all the time. So I think they kind of do what they want to do a little bit.
Yeah, and I would add being patchy in your disturbance. Disturbance can be tilling the ground, you know, planting or digging plants, moving rocks around. It sort of transfers over to butterflies as well. But you know, if you know that the, say, leafcutter bees are nested in your pile of stones, well, maybe wait till the flight season, till they're up and moving around, until you move those features. Just trying to work with them is sort of the best I can add.
I just wanted to jump in for 1 second. Sorry to interrupt there, but there are 22 grade 8 students who have been with us this whole time from Colquitt's Middle School with their teacher, Laura Lynn. And some have even been writing in with some excellent questions that got answered through our typing chat function. But I just wanted to thank them for their interest and for the group of experts here and for everyone else involved. It really means a lot, especially when there's youth involved, and we really appreciate you being here.
Awesome. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there and announce the prize winners. Amy, do you want to take over there?
Sure. Yeah, I would actually like to, provide the prize to Laura Lynn Helton and her grade 8 class, because I think it's wonderful that that you're getting youth engaged, and there were some fantastic questions asked by those grade 8 students. So yes, Laura Lynn, if you want to get in contact with us or email Laura, can you remind us of your email? And then
Laura Lynn has it. Thank you, Laura Lynn, for tuning in with your class. And yeah, just contact me, and I'll send you those cards. And for anybody else that needs it, it's lm@pollinator.org.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Thanks all. Bye.